Hi everyone, thank you for coming today. This is the Honours Induction Afternoon for CASS Honours students, new starters. I'm sitting down here because we have this magnificent creature. It's the owl. If you talk, it will follow your voice, and it's a 360 up the top, as you can see, which is kind of cool, I reckon. And it does go hoot when you turn it on. So if you hear a hoot, that's not a good noise, but it needs to turn itself off. Yeah, so as I said, I'm Andrew Carfrae. I'm the Deputy Manager in the CASS Student Office. I look after HDR students, honours students, and Masters Advanced students. I'll talk a little bit about it at the end. I'm joined today by three panelists. Another one may be coming in a minute. This is Beck Claude. She is the Honours Convener for English. And this is Sabine Kilday. She also was an English Honours student who completed in semester 2 of 2021 and is now in a PhD, which you can talk more about that. And similarly, this is Joshua Robinson, the masked one. He was a music honours student, and he completed also in second semester of 2021. And he also has started a PhD this year. So, yes. Without further ado, I'll just acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, and we pay our respects to the elders past and present. Now, we were to have Jeff Hinchcliffe today with us, who's the Associate Dean for Education, but unfortunately he couldn't make it today. So I'll probably jump straight in with Beck, sure. And I'll just fire up the PowerPoint.
That sounds good. Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. So I'm here today really to offer some broad advice and helpful hints for you guys as you navigate or begin to navigate your honours year. And I understand that there'll be some time for questions as well later on. So, you know, please feel free to share those questions with us either as we go or at the end. So I want to share some thoughts that are designed to help you get the most out of your studies. And to this end, I'm going to touch upon a number of topics, including the following. So organisation and time management, a little bit about the thesis project, but really more about balancing that with other components of the honours year and your life, and relatedly, well-being. So if we start with the first one, thanks, Andrew, organisation and time management. So hopefully you've all developed some strategies in organisation and time management during your undergrad degrees. And I know organisation looks quite different for everyone, depending on the way that you work and what's going on in your life. So I encourage you to find your own strategies. However, if organisation is not really in your skill set and you've typically been someone who has left things to the last minute, you need to get help with that aspect of your year quite early on in order to do the best that you can in your honours year and give yourself the chance of doing as well as possible. So some really simple things here. I highly recommend getting hold of an ANU semester or even better annual year planner that you can have up somewhere really prominent in your room. And this will allow you to map out your major deadlines, both the ones that you know already, e.g. thesis deadline. Andrew may have the date in mind more prominently than I do. Yeah. But it will also allow you to look at the overall picture of 2023, the academic year, and start to map out how much time you think you can devote to each project. Other simple pointer, which I'm sure will be touched upon by other speakers today, very much encourage you to start the research part of your honours year, whatever that looks like, early. So if you haven't done so already, to get into some readings related to your broad thesis topic and to find ways of continuing that practice throughout the year, even if you have coursework that falls predominantly in semester one or coursework spread throughout the year. You very much want to avoid a situation, and I realise I'm speaking here as though, and I imagine most of you will be doing honours in a way whereby you start in semester one and complete in semester two. But ideally, you want to be doing research for your thesis and working towards the thesis or relevant equivalent research project throughout the year. Just remember too that the folks at academic skills can help you. There's often, I think, still a bit of a misunderstanding that academic skills are there for people who still don't know how to write essays or, you know, do the kind of basic things which many of you do very well as incoming honours students. But they're actually very useful for students at all levels and abilities. As some of their testimonials, I think, try to advertise the fact that they can indeed be very helpful to honours students. So if what I'm saying in this, under this heading, is if you know that you've typically been someone who has left things till the last minute, that could present a challenge for you in the context of an honours year where you need to disperse your energies across the year and also manage the competing priorities of coursework and thesis. So I recommend going and having a chat to someone and asking them for help with some strategies in time management, in scheduling, in meeting deadlines. They've got all kinds of tricks. They might help you set some, you know, before the deadline deadlines and things that will enable you to do as well as you can. So moving on to our next heading, the thesis project or balancing. So for many of you guys, the honours year is going to see you really ensconced in the biggest research project that you've done to date. And that's really exciting in the sense that you get to invest in a project of your design for a significant duration of time. So my hope would be that you can explore and experiment and then refine. But of course, to manage this and to do a good job of juggling it alongside your coursework and the rest of your life, you will, as I mentioned, need to get organised. Consider too that the thesis project will, in most cases, be this year-long project, meaning that you need to find ways of working on it consistently throughout the year. Now, I just want to say a bit about juggling coursework and life, and these folks will no doubt have a bit to say about that too. If you have a part-time job, which I know that many of you will necessarily have, I would recommend seeing if your employer can offer flexible hours, particularly in the month that your thesis is due. Let your employer know, and particularly if you start a new job this year, let them know ahead of time that you have a thesis due in October and that's going to be a priority for you. And that's okay. It's completely acceptable and a good thing to make this your priority without compromising doing some level of paid employment. Treat your job treat your study as though it is your full-time job, which means devoting a minimum of 35 hours a week to your study, including your coursework, your research and your thesis. I really do recommend that you take it that seriously to give yourself the best chance, and the best chance of enjoying it as much as you can as well. You know, enjoy that time being at the National Library, exploring some archive, and really doing those deep dives into whatever critical literature you're reading, and then allowing yourself thinking time as well. And keep that 35 hours in mind when you are negotiating the logistics of your part-time work, appreciating the challenges that come with that. Just factor it in to how you plan your week out. Some other brief advice that others may well talk to: maintain a good relationship with your supervisor, whether it's research project or thesis or both. In English, the students do 3 courses and a thesis, and the thesis is worth half of the mark awarded. But the supervisor-student relationship is really important. It lies at the heart of the thesis project, but historically at the heart of university life, going way back to ancient Greek times. So it's fundamental, and not only will it be fundamental during your honours year, but it's sort of fundamental as an example of how scholarship works going into a PhD or in other academic mentor type relationships. And by navigating it well, you'll develop a really good skill set that's valuable in the workplace, regardless of whether you intend to become an academic or not. So the things that you can do to facilitate a good relationship with your supervisor include clear communication, and there are a few things that you can put in place to enable that, that others may talk to, but happy to talk a bit more about it during the question time if not. Mutual respect. And thirdly, by remembering that it's your project and the research will and should be driven by you. Finally, know who your honours convener is within your program area. And if you do run into any issues, not only, but including in the relationship with your supervisor, contact the honours convener early. Finally, just a bit about wellbeing. I feel very hypocritical in speaking to my first dot point because I'm not personally someone who has been good at maintaining the practice, but actually doing regular exercise will benefit your mental well-being and improve your academic capacity enormously. It's important because it gets you out of not only your own house, but out of your own head, and helps broaden your perspective on things during a year where you'll do a lot of navel gazing. Having admitted that I'm a hypocrite, I did exercise quite a bit during my honours year, and it was just gentle exercise, like in the form of swimming, which I do like. So just find something you like, even if it's going for a walk around the block, walk the dog, or a swim. Something simple is really good. Secondly, the importance of maintaining your relationships with friends and family, not only in the sense that you'll probably talk to your friends and family a lot about what you're doing this year and your topic. For many people, those people in our support network can be a really good sounding board for our ideas. but remember that it works the other way too. So remember to check in on the important people in your life throughout the year to keep things in perspective. And thirdly, if you have an honours cohort, particularly other students doing the same honours program, but it needn't be only that. It could be that you have a writing group with students from different areas. It can be really useful to meet with them for writing groups and to socialise. And some of the honours cohorts that I've convened and supervised before have found it really helpful to meet up once or more per week and just do some, for example, free writing in the morning where you spend an hour or two getting some words down on paper, particularly as you move into second semester and you are really at that stage of writing up your projects or writing your thesis. Now, if you have any stumbling blocks this year, like periods of writer's block, which seem to be getting a bit protracted, or other issues of that nature, do reach out to the services available. That the Academic Skills Centre is one, but there are also other support services. Get out and walk, do some free writing with your cohort, as I mentioned. And sometimes when you're stuck writing-wise, it's a really good idea just to return to your research for a little while. If you're at the point where you think you're ready to start writing and you're stuck, that can sometimes be a sign that you're actually not quite ready and you need to go back for another read through some of those articles and another work through of your ideas. But finally, to remind you that while the honours year does take management and hard work, things that I've touched upon here, it's also exciting and potentially very rewarding. And by taking it one step at a time, chunking it up, remembering to breathe even through the sticky bits, it will see you develop into a more critical thinker, a more independent and engaged researcher, and someone with a remarkable and unique skill set. And hopefully I've conveyed the sense here too that those are skills that will be incredibly valuable regardless of whether you go on to do a PhD or go out into the workforce, for example, through a graduate program or private industry. So enjoy the ride this year, guys. I'm really excited for you.
Thank you so much. All righty. Thank you.
Sure.
So Maria is here. Hola. Maria Hines is the supervisor of the Honours Convener for Sociology, Gender, Sexuality and Culture. And take it on. You're welcome. Wherever you
sure? Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Look, I may end up covering some of the same kind of ground. That was fantastic. The brief I got from Andrew was, and I quote, to talk about the honours experience, where it can take you, what to expect academically, etc. So that's right. So I suppose I was trying to think, you know, in very general terms. I mean, it's great you've got a fairly formal kind of a sense there, some really great tools. We've also got a guidebook, so it's the honours and masters and honours guidelines, which you may have already drawn their attention to, perhaps everyone already knows, available online. There's some fantastic sort of information in that about, you know, critical dates, about the process, examination process, the kind of resources you have. Definitely check out all of that sort of stuff. And there's some great stuff in there. I mean, I have to say I like the extra stuff at the end on self-care. I do sometimes the way we talk about honours, it must make it sound as if you're going into the most insane period of your life. Don't forget to wash, don't forget to and obviously I'm speaking to people without much of a sense of why you're doing honours, which probably makes a difference to what you expect from the honours experience. Can I just ask for a general sense, is there anyone here who thinks that they're doing honours because they would like to go on to do a PhD and perhaps academic stuff? All right, so a few of you, great. Anyone doing honours because they simply don't kind of know what to do next and it's a good way to buy some time? Yeah, well, that's all, yeah. That's right, many of us are still here on that kind of reasoning. Any other kind of reasons that anyone wants to mention?
Revenge.
Revenge.
My
This is someone.
broke up, it means to focus on it.
Okay. Well, I happen to know, so I'm partly supervising them. I happen to know there's other reasons you're doing it other than revenge, but so. All right. All right, terrific. I mean, I suppose, I think perhaps in terms of thinking about the honours experience, and you have to excuse me, I'm at that point of blindness where I have to keep pulling these on and off, but for me, I think the biggest challenge of honours that I've not just experienced myself doing it many years ago, but also observed in others, is trying to feel grown up. And I know that sounds an odd thing from someone in their mid-50s, but I mean, maybe it's because I'm the baby of the family. I never quite believe I'm kind of grown up, but watching other people in honours, that's my sense, is they're trying very hard to kind of grasp the transition that's happening in them. You are still an undergraduate, so don't expect yourself to be an academic overnight. But you're kind of not an undergraduate the way you were last year. And even just the fact that you're gathered here as an honours cohort, or, you know, maybe they're a master's student, whatever, that sort of puts you in a different kind of a mindset and a different, you know, way of feeling and thinking. So I would say that is one of the kind of, I don't mean biggest challenges in a negative sense, but it's actually what kind of drives you, is coming to see yourself differently. And actually, well, for me, I did honours partly to become a different person at the end of it, not necessarily a better person, but I was really interested in kind of what changes happened in me. And I think one of the most exciting things about honours, exciting sounds ingenuine, but it kind of is, you don't feel so, oh, you know, it's really stressful, but really exciting. But like, it genuinely is kind of an amazing thing that at the end of it, you feel like a different person. And I tried to think, well, for me, the biggest part of the honours experience was at that end, when I submitted that thesis, I really didn't care what anyone else thought of it by that point, which doesn't mean I didn't, like, actually, I put an extraordinary amount of myself into it, to the point that I did probably have to be reminded to wash, to walk, to you know, keep in contact with people, etc. But I had really thrown myself into it. And at the end, to be able to just say, I produced this thing, you know, there's going to be a couple of people mark it. I can't really influence what they think of it beyond what I've written. Like, you've done everything you can to convey what matters to you in this thesis to a reader. And so I'm not suggesting to be completely kind of in your own world about it. You're definitely trying to communicate to someone else. But at the end of the day, you can't influence whether they love it as much as you do or whatever, but you've produced it. And that's kind of an extraordinary feeling. Obviously, the recognition is really nice. And I will say that I think people in general, I think people that examine honours theses know they've probably done an honours thesis themselves. And so I think in general, there's kind of quite a lot of sort of commitment to honouring what you've done in honours. So it's not that you're going to get a harsh kind of a assessment at the end of it, but ultimately it is your kind of product, and that's not nothing. So trying to kind of think backwards then from, you know, what did it take to get to that place where I could do something that I was so proud of? But also I'm thinking about all the people I've supervised over the years, the people I've seen as the convener of the theory project, theory coursework, now in my role as honours convener. I think probably one of the things that is really big is learning to see yourself as a so-called independent researcher. Now, that's a phrase that you'll hear kind of quite a bit. Can I ask, what do you sort of expect that means, or how does it make you feel, the idea that you'll be an independent researcher? You want to? Yeah, thanks.
This is an initiative in there, you're designing a question.
Absolutely.
Not been answered before.
Absolutely. So taking an initiative, that's a massive one. And really a lot of what my thinking was about was how you actually learn to take that initiative, which involves a sort of a high degree of personal risk, really. So it involves some kind of taking initiative, designing a project, also asking a question. Now, you might not, you don't expect that you're going to solve the question that you've asked, particularly for theses that are quite big. If you take on the challenge of, how we manage climate change, then you're probably not going to solve that problem in the course of one honours thesis. But what you will do is ask a really good question. And so you'll pose an interesting problem, a problem that, you will then help guide people through. So yeah, some really great stuff in that thing of sort of taking initiative. You are an independent researcher in honours in a way that you weren't before. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I felt my undergraduate was just a series of jumping hoops. It's like you start the semester really sort of interested in the course, and then before you know it, there's deadlines, and then you've got more deadlines and more deadlines, and then by the end of it, you're just sitting around trying not to weep as you sort of, pull out essay after essay after essay. But it feels a bit like sort of just jumping hoops, and it also feels a lot like you're trying to guess the criteria on which you're going to be judged by others, satisfy a lot of different gods, as the sociologist Max Weber would say. You're trying to kind of place, okay, how does this subject like their essays to be written? How does that particular teacher, what are they after? In honours, you're an independent researcher in the sense that you're being asked to take the initiative to form a problem, to convince others that it's an important and interesting one, and to show them that you've done something important and interesting in the way you've unpacked it. That's it. So you're kind of producing a creative product that is significant. And look, it is going to be significant by virtue of the fact that you're doing research. So if you do something empirical, for example, I don't know how many of you are sort of imagining you'll do field work of some sort, some of you, yeah? If you do something, if you do interviews or you do, participant observation or whatever it is, then you've immediately got something original because, you've selected a sample of people or you've selected a case study that, by virtue of you being there immersed in that context, you've got something original. If you do something theoretical, if you do a creative product, so we have people here from art and design. Yeah, all right, sure. So, and obviously we're so much in the habit of talking in terms of sort of writing. You have a writing component, but you also are producing a creative work. No one will do the thing you've done, which isn't to say that what you do will be absolutely original. And I think one of the things that happens with honours is that people think, okay, I'm going to be an independent researcher. I'm going to do, well, I remember, I don't know, I was starting to, it was a very chance way that I did this was my PhD. It was like, well, to be really honest, I wasted the first 6 months of my candidature, and I woke up one morning and said, whatever is on the radio when I turn it on has to be my thesis topic because I need to decide on something. And from there on, it was a series of sort of chance encounters. It was on genetic science, and I thought, oh, okay. So I'm going to do something on genetic science. And then because I was finding the science sort of stuff a bit tedious to read after a while, I went and did a sculpture course for something else to do. And then I got very interested in the way that art and science sort of spoke to each other. Well, now we have a lot of art science institutions, but in 2003, that sort of wasn't quite the case in the same way. But anyway, it felt like, oh, okay, I could see, I was taking an initiative, I could see an original kind of problem arise. And then one day I was over at the Kofa Library in Sydney and I picked up a book and it was just like, oh my God, this is my thesis. I rang my partner and said, my thesis is in the library. Well, of course it wasn't. For one thing, it was written by this fantastic philosopher who I could never write like. But there was that sort of sense that, oh my God, someone else has done the thing. Well, you won't do anything utterly original. And you are all writing in a context of a very, like a political economy of knowledge production, in which, as one author I know says, there are more people writing things than there are with people with time to read it. So a lot of people are producing knowledge and producing kind of theses, producing creative works. That's the kind of political economy you're in. So it will not be utterly original. Don't stress out if you see, that book on the library or that article that really deals with the same things as you, because it won't come at it in the same way. Yeah. All right. Please ask any questions you have along the way, because I'm sort of diverging a bit from what I'd originally planned. I suppose one other thing I'd like to say on that is that hopefully you will come to believe in this process of trying to sort of feel grown up enough to be doing what you're doing, hopefully you will come to believe that you are actually developing expertise. And this is something that someone said to me during honours, and frankly, I didn't believe it. But when honours had finished, I did. That you will become an expert in your topic as no one else is. Because you will bring together precise things, because you will happen upon different texts, because you will do different, empirical studies, you will do something that no one else has done. And that means you have a degree of expertise. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take on advice from other people, but it does mean that you kind of, if you can grow into that place where you have the confidence to know that you're doing something, not just in this flailing way, but you're becoming an expert in a field. Now, one of the things I think with the fact that when you do something as significant as an honours thesis, or as a year when you have to really throw yourself into it and take a risk, you do find your kind of sense of yourself transforming quite a lot. And one of the things I've definitely observed when I'm supervising people is that the more competent they become, the higher their expectations of themselves go. And so they'll start by feeling like, oh my God, I just can't believe I'm sort of doing honours. And, it's only a few years ago I started doing undergraduate, now I'm doing honours. And then, they're feeling not very confident. As the confidence grows, they start to expect almost they're an academic. And they then have these very kind of, you then have people like total meltdowns because, they're not writing, a book that's going to stand the test of time as Plato's Republic did. So just bear in mind that your expectations of yourself will go up as your capabilities do, and just actually be kind to yourself, which gets back to the sort of self-care stuff. I think one of the other really important things I would say is that you're not doing it alone. Yes, you're doing it with a supervisor, and that supervisor-student relationship can be really important. As a supervisor, it's so fabulous to watch someone like just really throw themselves into something, to take a risk, to become uncomfortable because they're having to learn new things, and yet to also feel their own capabilities kind of growing. So it's fantastic to supervise people. Do as much as you can to kind of get as much as you can out of the supervision relationship. And one of the things that involves, and here again, the taking a risk thing is big, is exposing yourself a little bit in a way that can be a bit freaky. You've probably chosen a supervisor that you think is pretty, they've been a good teacher in some way. Maybe they've kind of stimulated your thinking or encouraged you or whatever. So it can then be a bit frightening to sort of send them a piece of what you think is rubbish. All I can say as a supervisor is that the most nerve-wracking thing about honours is if no one shares what they're doing with you. So if you have a student who is so keen to show you something that's really perfect and spot on, that they just keep holding it back, and you're saying, hey, come on, it's weak, whatever, can I see something? That's so nerve-wracking. And I think it's really not great for the student. So just really early on, get in the habit of communicating your thinking to your supervisor. And even if it's an email that says, hey, I'm feeling so lost in the literature, but what I'm trying to do at the moment is this. Just that communication is really good. But then also once you start writing your ideas down, show them in their grottiest form. And know that anyone who has ever written has written in a probably fairly ugly way first up. So that's a really big one, is to share the stuff when it's looking blah. Now, there are various ways that you can do that. You might have to communicate with your supervisor to the extent that you know the way that would work for you. For me, good supervision is partly about working out what is it with this person? How do they work best? And so if I have someone that I know is really kind of anxious about sharing their stuff, I'll just try and cut through that right from the start. So I'll just sort of say, look, how about from here on in you just send me some really rough thoughts, or put your stuff on Google Docs. I won't look at it, but it's there. Just something to write from the start. So you might need to communicate to your supervisor, oh, look, I get a bit nervous about sharing stuff if it doesn't look really great? And how would you feel about me doing X? Now, they might not be able to read or give detailed comments on everything, but if it just helps you get through that hoop of sharing, then I'd try that pretty early on. The other kind of bit in terms of the kind of collective nature of the experience, I would really try to think about this as something you do with your peers. And I know you'll get a lot of sort of cheesy stuff about the cohort and all of that kind of stuff. There's a degree of chance to the cohort. There have been times I've seen, look, nearly every time I've supervised here at ANU, that cohort has been incredibly supportive. A couple of times I've seen, you know, you just might get one person who's really competitive, and that can really change the vibe of, you know, if you've got someone sitting there at the start of each kind of, you know, casual catch up. Oh yeah, no, I had a good weekend. I got chapter 5 written, and it's just, I haven't even started. I can't even read it out. And have you written chapter? Yeah. Oh, that's cool. It's cool. It's fine. So just really don't do that to other people. And if you're aware of any of your peers doing it, you know, kind of try and say, oh, hey, you know, say something to sort of remind them of the kind of mood that's required here. But as much as possible, I would really, even like other people will do projects that will be really different to yours. Don't assume that there's a better or worse, but really try and kind of make the most of that group experience. In something like the coursework, so I teach the honours theory course for sociology, I say to people, please, I don't want you typing stuff. I don't want you typing notes down. I run it like a small reading group. And a couple of times that people get their computers out and they type, and I just say, guys, what are you doing? It's a reading group. And I can understand they're trying to get down notes that might be relevant for their thesis. But as far as I'm concerned, when you're there in the course time,
Left you this morning.
you're part of a reading group.
Walk down that way.
Hello, come in London.
Who have we got?
That way.
Is someone got a question?
No.
Okay. You might like to
Mike.
mute yourself.
And I'm sorry, I was actually kind of forgetting we have other people over there. I don't really need to look, but yeah. So yeah, something like when you're there in your coursework, it's a group dynamic. And so you don't just read in order that you get the most out of the reading. You don't take notes in order that it can contribute to your thesis, even if you manage to sort of do that as well. But principally, you're there to be part of a kind of a collective learning experience and sort of feel like you owe it to the others to read well and to be prepared to discuss. So I'd suggest that in your coursework, like really use it as a chance to, you can get a lot from each other, but also, you know, really make a point of being supportive to each other. If you see something that is useful for someone else's thesis, swing it their way. I guess the other kind of part, the broader collective in which you write is family and friends. You mentioned family and friends. One thing I would say is that sometimes, possibly family particularly, because many of your friends might be from uni, won't really know what an honours year is about. And sometimes their questioning can feel hostile, and I really don't think it's intended that way. They will say, so where are you at with your thesis now? Yeah, that's right. And so, you know, what I would suggest is a couple of things. Well, no, it's tricky. I know my mum, if I would just explain things in a way that she didn't understand, she'd say, oh, well, I can't make sense of that. If I explain it the way she did understand, she'd say, well, I don't know why you need to go to university to learn that. It can be slightly tricky. But the thing I would say is to get a formula, like about a 25-word formula that explains what your problem is, your question, the thing that interests you, and about once a month, update it. It reassures you and it reassures other people. So, for example, if my honours thesis topic was on the way that the relationship between ideas of death and community with respect to the AIDS crisis. So I would sort of, you know, say that firstly, like at the beginning of the year, I'd tell people that's what interested me. Maybe a month later, I'd add a little bit about the fact that I'd decided to focus on an art exhibition as a way to kind of come into that. You know, maybe a month later, you might say, oh, you know, I've chosen these particular artists, and you can talk a little bit about that. Just something that enables them to track, but also you to track where you're coming, how you come along. Possibly the other thing I would sort of say related to all of that is try and use those things instead of experiencing everything as a test in honours. And again, I know it sounds cheesy. Oh, don't experience it as a test, make it an opportunity. But I suppose what I'm trying to kind of say is, you know, there are things that you have to do, like communicate with other people, like do an ethics application that might be really, really useful. So something like if you are having to put in an ethics application, certainly you can look at it and it's just like, oh God, a form. I don't know if anyone else has form phobia the way I do, but it's like, you know, what do they want? What do they want from me? We'll try to just think, actually, how can this help me to clarify what I'm interested in? And people aren't going to judge what you're interested in. They're just wanting to make sure that you kind of know what it is and what that involves. So any sort of thing like that, try to kind of think, okay, how can I turn this around and kind of think, all right, yeah, okay, this could maybe help me to, you know, reassure myself I know what I'm doing and also practice communicating to other people. The other, probably the last thing I'll kind of talk about, I'm not sure, am I sort of still like 1 more minute?
No,
Cool.
we have until 4 o'clock.
Yeah, sure. All right. Okay. Well, all right, then a couple of other things. I would suggest that you, apart from taking a risk, as much as possible, immerse yourself in it. Now, we've already had discussion about the fact that you're probably also working. Is there anyone here who thinks they would be able to or intends to not work while they're doing honours? So a few people, all right. And then some other people will need to be doing some work as well. Yeah, all right. And you'll also have other aspects of your life. Don't totally run yourself down, but as much as you can, and it's really about quality rather than quantity. I really don't think that you necessarily have to be sitting at anything you do all the time. You don't have to give every moment over to the honours thesis, but just try to minimise the torture. So if you're sitting with something that you're doing, you're trying to, okay, I've got these couple of hours and I'm going to work on my honours thesis. You sit down, oh, God, a couple of hours, oh my God, I've already wasted 20 minutes worrying about what I'm going to do with a couple of hours. There's so many ways that you can torture yourself doing intellectual work. Do everything you can to minimise it. Now, part of this is the support you give to each other, but also some of it is just trying to learn to be a bit flexible. You know, learning isn't just accumulation. We now kind of know a lot about brain plasticity. It's really often about forming new habits, about forming new kind of neural pathways, and that involves a degree of kind of creativity in the way you come at things. So if you have 2 hours and you go to work on it and you just feel like you're hitting, you know, knocking your head against a brick wall, try something different. Go for a walk, talk to someone about it. Sometimes by the end of honours, it gets a bit like talking at someone. I've actually had a student run into me once and I said, look, I've really got to get to this meeting and I'm a bit late, but if you want to walk with me up to, well, they're kind of running behind me, you know, and then you trap the tree, and then it can get a little like try and maintain your basic social skills. But, you know, ask a friend, you know, do you mind if I have a little bit of a rave, you know, about this sort of stuff? If you're someone who can work on paper, like I'm still sort of a bit of a papery person, unfortunately. I will print something out, go to a cafe and work on it. So just try not to sort of sit sort of battling yourself. Different techniques. And again, you know, I suppose I'm sort of suggesting that a large part of learning is about these material kinds of habits and techniques that you develop. Just try stuff out, but also share them. Like, you know, your group can be kind of, sometimes you can do it as a bit of a, you know, group therapy session, like what are you finding is working? I will sometimes get my students, if they're feeling kind of a bit, you know, blocked with ideas, just to do anything to free up. Now, I wouldn't recommend, you know, oh, okay, have a glass of wine and then do it, because that's probably not kind of great advice, but you're basically trying to get into that state. You're trying to get into that sort of slightly relaxed state. And so sometimes the best thing to do is just write. And for some reason, if you still know how to handwrite, some people don't handwrite very often these days, but handwriting, there's something interesting about doing it by hand. And I think it's a little bit like when you're, learning to, I have a child who's dyspraxic and he found it easy to learn to write by doing things big, involving his body and stuff. There's something about handwriting that can free things up. So just simple techniques like, okay, I'm going to sit with a couple of pieces of paper for 10 minutes. I'm going to write and write and write and write. And the only rule is that I can't stop writing for those 10 minutes. And so in that 10 minutes, you might be, and often the first time you do it, you're just saying, I don't even know what I'm writing about. I don't even know what interests me. There's really shitting me that I can't do it. It's just, but write. You stop, you put that piece of paper away and you do another one, do 3 of those. And I can guarantee that by the 3rd one, there will be some content in there that you can use. So that's just one strategy that I use sometimes. Sometimes writing to yourself as a diary, kind of an entry, can be useful. Oh, Maria, what is it that you're really trying to sort out here? You can then go through that later and turn it around into something. So whatever it is, and share those with other people. Okay. The last thing I guess I would say something about is the thesis. And the principal thing I wanted to say about that is that at the end, when you need to produce a thesis, just bear in mind that no one else knows, apart from your supervisor, but maybe they don't even fully know. No one really knows what you wanted to do at the beginning. And I think sometimes what happens at the end, people are just like, but this isn't the thesis I wanted to write. It really doesn't matter. It's a thesis. And you can really make sort of anything work if you have good methods of, good use of theory, good methods of writing. You can make anything work as an argument. And literally, like the word thesis actually in its Greek origins means a cutting out. So from everything you've done, you're going to cut out a thesis. If it's not exactly the thesis you thought you were going to write, that's fine. And sometimes you might make some really fairly radical executive decisions near the end to make it work. So I was, as I said, looking at this art exhibition in about the last week. I just thought, oh, why am I so bogged down? What is happening in this chapter? And I suddenly thought, I don't like that artist. I've been writing on this guy for months, and I just suddenly thought, I actually don't find that work very stimulating. I chucked it out and added some other stuff in. So at the end, I kind of cut something out of the whole process and made a thesis. That's all you need to do. And you only need to write one. So that might mean you kind of need to contain it. Sometimes you think, oh, I'd really love to explore this, but it might not hold together anymore as a thesis. Put that somewhere for later ideas. They're probably the principal things I wanted to kind of, anyone have any questions? Or?
Think about questions and we will return to Q&A.
Okay, all right.
But thank you so much. I'll be surreptitious with you, perhaps. Thank you both. Really, that was really good. All right, now let's move on. Student experience. Sabine, how'd it go?
Hi everyone, I'm Sabine. I'm doing my PhD in cultural studies and humanities now, but 2 years ago I was doing my honours thesis in English literature, which was, to be honest, very cultural studies based anyway, so it's not that big of a switch. But so like you guys at the start, I was really nervous, and I remember I walked in to my first class and it was a thesis building class. It was designed to help you pick your topic and figure out what to do. And I sat down next to strangers that I'd never met, and every single one of them was like, I'm doing this, and told the most expertise, perfect sentence. And they're like, what about you? And I was like, oh, I'm like interested in pop culture, I guess. And they were like, oh, I'm studying 18th century literature, blah, 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 blah. And I felt so embarrassed and such an idiot that I hadn't done more, and I wasted my whole summer, and I started having this internal spiral for the whole 2 hours. I didn't pay a single bit of attention, where the teacher would have been like, it's okay not to have any ideas, and I was being like, I'm an idiot. And then I ran out of the class and I thought, and then it was week 2, and then it was week 3, and then it was week 4, and I still was researching and reading and being like, I don't have a single idea. And then I wasn't really talking to my supervisor because I was like, she's going to think I'm an idiot if I don't tell her exactly what I'm doing. And then week 4 had been a month, and I was like, Roseanne, I'm It's an idiot. What am I doing in honours? I'm too dumb to be here. I've fooled everyone to get in. Everyone around me is so much smarter than I am. And I can't even write a single word. And she was like, what is happening? I've been studying this whole time. And I was like, tell me that. And I was like, yeah. And then a week later, I stumbled into a really random topic that was not at all what I thought I was going to be doing. And I loved it. And I continued on. I'm now doing a PhD on it. But you've got to give yourself time, and you need to understand that everybody around you is as feeling like an idiot as you are. It is so normal to be like, oh, everyone around me is much smarter than I am. No, that is just terrible imposter syndrome, and you need to grow up out of it. Because about 5 weeks into my thesis, I was like to my beautiful supervisor and now PhD supervisor, Roseanne, I was like, when am I just going to feel like an expert in this? When am I just going to be so confident in my work that I'm never going to shake when I have to present? And she was like, you're never going to feel like that. I don't feel like that. And I was like, oh, I'm an expert in your field and you publish papers all the time and you go to conferences overseas. And she's like, yeah. And I sometimes feel a bit stupid. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I think the point of that is that you're going to feel silly and you're going to feel a bit embarrassed maybe sometimes about some of your ideas, and there are things that you don't think other people are going to find interesting. And I think you just need to get over it. And you're allowed to feel embarrassed, but you can't let that stop you from doing your work. Because otherwise you're going to come to 1 year in and you're not going to have done anything, rather than do something that maybe you're a little bit embarrassed by and then just produce that. So I think you just have to work no matter what. And number one tip to working is to write. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I struggle a lot sometimes with starting the writing process. And I also have dyslexia. So I can get really embarrassed by other people reading my work because I misspell things like food. And it's like, it's a 4-letter word, but to me, there's only one O. I can't do it. I don't know. And so one of my tips that I have told everyone to do, and everyone who's ever done it, has been like, this is really weird, but it works, is turn your text on Word white and turn the red underline off and just go. And then in about 20 minutes, turn it back on and just see what's happened. You'll discover it yourself and be like, hey, this is some pretty good stuff. That's my recommendation. And my other recommendation as well is to go to the ANU library and download EndNote right now, and go to the ANU library EndNote discussion and learn how to use it. If that's not on this year, go watch a YouTube tutorial and take about 3 hours out of your life now and become an expert at using EndNote, so that at the end of your thesis, you're fantastic at it. That is my number one recommendation. I did that, no regrets. My best friend in honours did not. She's now doing a PhD and she still does all her referencing by hand. And it disgusts me. EndNote does it for you. You put a link in and they do it. It's so simple. It's not the most intuitive system, but once you know how to use it, it's just so worth it. So I really recommend going and doing that. And that's all my advice.
Thank you so much. But I can do EndNote tutorials, and you can get one-on-ones as well through Chifley. So let's look on their site. I think there's a booking system as well if you want to book a bit. That's an excellent, excellent piece of advice. Because then when you do your PhD, you can then easily segue into using it immediately from the beginning. Anyway, thank you. All right, now, Josh.
Yeah, what hasn't been said already. I'm Josh. I did a music honours, and so that was what they call a non-traditional thesis. So I actually got to write music for my thesis, which was pretty cool. So if you're doing like visual art or music or something like that, you'll have that fun experience. And then you also get the fun experience of having to analyze your own stuff and write about that and kind of really do some soul searching to do that. So that was a lot of fun, actually. I really enjoyed that. I think that was good in that you, in the times where you didn't want to write words, you could write music, or you can do other arty sort of thing. So like just in general, I think it's good to have a bit of a distraction from the honours project, something that you can go to and just do something that takes your mind off what you're doing. And I think that's really important, because then it'll give you an opportunity to forget about that stuff and you come back to it later with a fresh set of eyes, and you can go, oh, actually that thing that I've been stuck on for a while is actually a lot more clearer now. I also say you don't need to have something new every week, but it is good to have do consistent stuff. But I remember it was around my week 4 of honours, and week 4, I tell you, it's just it sounds like the worst time. I went and I met my supervisor and I was like, I'm so sorry, I don't have anything new this week. I'm an awful student. I haven't done anything. I feel so bad. And he was like, I don't expect you to have anything new every week. Like, that's just, it's impossible for anyone. So keep that in mind. Like, you're not a machine. You can't just go forever. It's okay to have weeks where you're not doing as much because you're getting things ready for the weeks where you do a lot. And that's okay to keep in mind. Yes. I would also say it's good to make your courses work for you. A lot of the time they're set up so that it helps you with your thesis as well. Like, they're not always kind of these two separate things. So you can be really clever and do stuff in your coursework that you can then bring into your thesis, but then you're kind of halving the amount of work that you actually need to do over the course of the year. So that is a really good piece of advice that I got from my honours convener, and I think it's just really handy because it means if you do courses in the first semester, you can reach halfway through the year and just be able to take stuff you've already done, tweak it slightly, and you've got a quarter or even half of the draft ready to go out the bat. Yeah, so I think those are my kind of major points. I think everything else has pretty much been covered. So everything that's been said today is really good. I'll finish with that. Yeah, all really good advice. Yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So you're talking there about the music composition almost as sort of the creative bit that gives you a break from the writing.
Yeah.
But I suppose I'm wondering, because I'm aware that, I've sort of spoken with writing principally in mind, and I just wondered, to what extent that part of the process, what kind of difficulties did that present? And I'm partly asking because I went to see the film, was it The Banshees of Inisherin the other day? The guy that keeps cutting off his fingers, and you sort of suspect that for him it gives him some sort of release that at least he can't be expected to compose and play violin, which is the thing that he supposedly wants to do.
Yeah.
So I suppose, I don't know if you can say anything about the difficulties, like the kind of blocks that you come up with the creative part of the.
I think from my perspective, it sounds very similar, and it is kind of similar to working through a thesis. It's just kind of a different way of representing your arguments. But I think as well, so for me, my research was in intercultural music, so I was immersing myself in Balinese culture and doing participant observation and stuff there, and trying to figure out this musical system that I had no experience with. And that was really tough because you're kind of, in a sense, it was like having to write my thesis in a new language that I'd never studied before. And so that was
Be an anthropologist.
Yeah. So that was a tricky part of the process. And I think writing music it can be really tricky, or any kind of art, because of that very abstract way that you have to think about it, and the kind of, you can have an idea and not know how to express it, or you can get very caught up on just one minuscule part instead of looking at kind of a broader part of it. And so there were definitely times where on my thesis I would kind of just stop for a bit, and I would be like, I don't know what else to go. I just can't wrap my head around what I'm supposed to do next, or what I want to do, or how I'm meant to show something. And with creative arts, I found going out and doing something like that, it's all about world experience and life experience, and trying to bring that into your work as well. So, and I'm sure that also applies to traditional theses as well. But yeah, especially in my experience, that was part of it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, question.
In teaching something in a musical language, new language to speak in, did that blow out your 35-hour week expected? I suppose I should rephrase it and ask along the lines of, is that an additional requirement, or actually that's a rebate? The challenge is a rebate into that 35-hour week?
For me, it was baked in, like I knew going into it that was going to be a part of it. And I think for me, I kind of had an idea of the scope of what I wanted to do, and I knew I was never going to come out with like these kind of grand, like opera length sort of things or something like that. So the work that I did in my thesis was actually relatively basic. And I guess if you want to think about it like equivalent musically, it would be kind of like if I had never learned a language before and then wrote like children's books or something, you know, like a little like selection of that. It's nothing that's like someone in that culture is going to be like, oh yeah, like this is, you know, new and exciting and wonderful, but it is something that like for the examiners, they were like, wow, you've clearly put in all this work to get to this point and you've managed to show what you've done and how you've done it. And that was more my approach for it. So that was baked into it. And I think, yeah, I was lucky that I knew that was going to be the scope of the project. And I think if I didn't know that at the start, it's okay when you're a bit into it to go, I need to pare this back. Like, this is getting too big. I'm spending too many hours a week on this compared to where I think I should be at. And it's okay to kind of bring your scope back a bit and focus a bit more on one particular thing.
Just to add to what you were saying, I have had a number of students who I've supervised who early in the year, we've talked about their topic and I said, this is great for a PhD, but what you need to do is something much more scaled back than that. And so I had one student who wanted to write about the challenges for female vocalists on Broadway in navigating like the pitch and the scale that the female roles of Broadway musicals are often written in, and the whole like feminist politics behind that, and you know, history of female vocalists losing their voices and their careers by singing particular musicals day in, day out. That was going to be the PhD topic, and she ended up writing about something much smaller, which was an analysis of Hello Dolly, which is her favourite musical, but she applied a feminist analysis to that play and looked at the production history of it. So sort of touched upon some of the themes and territory that had initially interested her, but in a way that was vastly scaled down and manageable. And so your supervisors can be quite helpful in identifying when your topic is too big, even if you're at the point where you're still excited by the PhD idea. Yeah.
But also be wary of if you have a supervisor that's very keen, because my supervisor was very keen and would be like, oh, why don't you look into this and why don't you look into this? And I had to be like, oh, I think that's getting a bit too much. Yeah.
That's the PhD.
Yeah.
So I can see that there's a couple of questions in chat, but we'll get to them after I go Q&A, if that's okay. Cool, terrific stuff. Thank you, everyone. So I'll just say a few things about the administration, but I want to also say a couple of personal things. So I did a master's thesis. It was in Buddhist philosophy. I also worked full time. So that was an intense experience. And we all talk about it being this sort of discovering new versions and parts of yourself. Well, I think I did a little bit of the old Phoenix out of the fire. It was intense, and it sort of sounds a bit scary when we're all talking about it. This thesis being this huge piece of work, you know, that could be transformative, that could be, you know, discovering new parts. So it is, and I guess it's just about what you want to put in is what you're going to get out of it. So I think it is worth, when you are sitting there in week 4 going, I'm an idiot, or I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, for me, I'd get home at night and all I wanted to do is sit there with a glass of wine and a cat. When I had to get out the old philosophy things and go and read, especially after my day at work, it was a real effort, but it was worth it in the end. So I guess it's that short-term pain for the old long-term gain. Yes, more cheese. We should have had biscuits today as well. But anyway, So I also wanted to talk about that flower work because that really helped me. Because I had all of this, I had this big kind of black, sometimes white cloud around my head because there was so much information that I was absorbing and gathering. One of the supervisors that I had, she was the chair of the religious studies department at the University of Sydney, and she said, just right. She said, because you can edit complete rubbish, you can't edit nothing. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll write complete rubbish there. And by the end of it, I managed to, throw stuff out. And so it was this process that you hear every year that I've been doing it. You hear this process from students. And it's almost an archive process. I think it's really good. There have been shut up and write sessions as well. That means that the cohort TM gets together and everyone sits down and just writes, there may be alcohol involved, there may be juice, there may be water, there may be cheese biscuits. But people sit down, write, and they say, what do you think it is? Or they say, what's another word for theodolite or whatever, It's that kind of sharing that experience amongst the cohort that really helps, because there are people there who are in the same position as you, and it does actually make a difference. So if you haven't already, start thinking about other people in your cohort from your coursework courses you're doing, and then maybe, signing up to someone and saying, hey, let's start a group. It's really, if your conveners and supervisors haven't already started to do that. And also the other thing I was going to say was the Honours and Masters Guide. It's just been updated for 2023. It is on the website. So you go to CASS current students, and then you click on the Honours bit, and there's a link down there. We're about to change pages a bit, but nothing radical. So I've got here about my administrative stuff. You've got a maximum completion of 2 years. That's small hooray. So that's also with part-time. If you go past that, you need a little bit of, you need approval from the associate dean. You have to also, maximum time when you finish to when you actually start your honours is 2 years. So if you do want to take a break or something, you need to make sure that you're within that 2-year period. The structure is 24 units of coursework, 24 units of thesis. Now, some disciplines have 12 units of thesis, 12 units of coursework, then neatly 12 units of thesis, 12 units of coursework in the next one, the next semester. But if you're doing something like part-time, it might end up being like 6 units of thesis and 12 units of coursework, and then kind of changes. Philosophy is really, are there any philosophy specialization? Yes. So that's what philosophy, you can have 6 units here. It's very, very flexible. Other people like history, they are less flexible, but everyone gets there in the end with this 24 units and 24 minutes. If you do want to go, is anyone doing part-time study? Not yet. I'm sure that will change. The voice of wisdom. Yeah, so if you do want to go part-time, you have to get a thesis supervisor confirmation form signed again to make sure that your supervisor is going to be available for however long you are going to take. It seems like a real drag, and believe me, it is for us too. But it's part of the enrollment rules that you have to make sure that your supervisor will be there for your whole thesis. And if they're not, well, then you have to make other arrangements. And it's actually a pastoral care. Well, I'm framing it as that anyway. So if you want to take program leave, you can also do that. You're all enrolled, I assume. Yes, very good. If you do want to do that, it would be program leave. You don't defer anymore because you're in the program. Deferral is when you haven't gone in the program and you want to put it to another year. Going on program leave is, I got hit by a bus or, whatever. I'm over it. Anyway, I know I'm being flippant, but it actually is, it's important to make sure you know when to take program leave as well. Because if you're there going, no, don't do that, take program leave. Extension, that's also another thing. If you've gotten to the end of your tenure, gotten to the end of your year or more, and you go, I just can't finish it by this time, then you can go through the extension process. It's reasonably okay, you know, a month, 2 months, etc. But let's not really focus on that. You are day one, well, let's say day 3. What bit thesis due dates for semester 2? It is the 23rd of October at 5 p.m. So you will be in the Wattle site by now. There is a big box on the Wattle site that says submit here. So you can talk to your convener or your supervisor about that, or you can also contact us if you can't find it. Something other weird happens. As Beck has said, academic skills and learning is not just for people who are having problems. They give some great advice for people who just need a little bit of inspiration or whatever. So all I can say is talk to your supervisor, confirm your enrolment. If you're not enrolled, then contact us. If you need a permission code to get into your thesis as well, please contact us as well. You can talk to me afterwards if you want. I'll be right here. And then make sure to start your core fluid components and start your reading. That's my advice. Yeah. All right. So, question time. Do we have any questions from the floor? Yes.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It was good. Great talk. I'm very one question about word processing software. So I know Emma was mentioned for the reference in software, but do you have any advice on the actual writing software you use, like Scrivener or Microsoft Word or anything else?
For me, I've always, with the kind of work I've done, I've always been able to keep it pretty simple and just use Word. But I agree with what Sabine said, that it is really valuable to, you know, spend the time now on a 3-hour workshop or whatever for one of the footnoting and referencing softwares. Yeah, that's been my experience. How about you, Maria?
So I've actually just got myself onto Zotero because I've heard it's a good referencing program. Hadn't used EndNote for a few years, so yes, Word. But actually, to be honest, like sometimes your handwriting stuff. I mean, one of the things when we were talking about sort of, you know, the fact that the ideas will become more and more a part of you and your life. You'll find that, I don't know, ideas seem to come from the shower head or something. Like you jump in the shower and that's when they, oh my God, that's when it's suddenly clear, when you're not sitting at the computer. So just like have it, like actually use whatever sort of strategies, have a notebook or whatever around, but otherwise word processing. The one thing I would say in terms of even just something like Microsoft Word, do pay attention to, sometimes you just develop kind of habits and you don't really think too much about what you do when you get onto something like Word. Really pay attention to what works for you in terms of the architecture of the thing. I know that I gave a chapter of my PhD thesis to a friend who's an academic to read, and he said, look, it's really good, but it's so tight. And he said, your argument doesn't have to be that tight right through the whole 100,000 word thesis. And I explained that I kept it tight like that because that was the way I had to be linear, so that I could hold it all together. And he just said, why don't you go to a smaller font and go single lines? And somehow when I could see more of it on the page, I didn't feel quite the same need to be kind of really tight in the argumentation. So the actual software you use might be quite simple, but do pay attention to, you know, the actual architecture of it, what a certain platform might afford or whatever, and, you know, experiment with it a bit. And sometimes different fonts get me in different moods. Times New Roman gets me really kind of grumpy and but yeah, just try.
If you have troubles with spelling like I do, it's like scientifically proven that Comic Sans is the friendliest font for dyslexia. So it's foul, but it's really good to write with. And then I use Word, and the reason I use Word is because it actually has a fantastic dictation device, and I work best orally, especially when I'm like, because I think very fast and I can't type as fast, especially spelling wise. And so the dictation tool is really good. It like actually can follow you really well.
They've got heaps better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
and you
used
can
to be
actually
really
walk
bad.
with them. That's right.
But yeah, but Word also is friends with EndNote and Zotero. So I know that the Mac, I can't remember what it's called, the Mac writing can't use EndNote. So you'll need to be careful with what ones can have a relationship with the others.
What's it there?
Zotero is another referencing one. It's
Yeah.
easier to use and you can get a handle of it quicker, but EndNote has more options, but it just depends on what you need. Because if you don't need the extra EndNote options, it might not be worth, learning EndNote.
And it's just, Zotero's free download. There's a little video of how to use it. How to keep notes and summaries and things on articles, how it will upload. And so, yeah.
There's a couple of other softwares that popped up last week called like Conjugation Video or something like that.
Yeah,
I'll have to try and find a couple of names of them.
great.
Are they another? Can you think about that? I'll find the names.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should have
No, you're good.
done that because I'm interested to know if there are other
Yeah.
ways we can change our workflow using.
Yeah.
providing-
Do other people, have people used software for referencing in your undergraduate? Yeah,
Yeah.
some.
Yeah.
And EndNote or?
I used EndNote,
Yeah, okay. And I don't know, it's probably, the reason I stopped using EndNote was it seemed to really slow my computer down. It seemed to sort of slow it down at the start of, but it is pretty good for the functions. You find it, yeah?
Yeah, NVivo and Covenants, but I'm not sure they're referencing.
Oh, so no, NVivo is more like more like if you have a pile of data and it might help thematically sort out that data. So if you had a pile of interview transcripts you put in it, NVivo might say, look, this word appeared this many times. And so I don't use that kind of software, but there will be people around. Can I ask what school you're doing in which school are you doing your pieces?
Is that which is.
Oh, you're at Caper. All right, sure. So there'll be probably someone there that uses NVivo, and I don't think they'd probably hesitate. It can be really useful for sorting out.
I'm not sure what the support is like here on campus for anything other than EndNote. I have a feeling that it is pretty much EndNote poster child.
Okay.
So I think the reason why they use EndNote or they support EndNote is because it's easy to store PDFs in there and you've got instant access to them and there's websites. But they do a lot of courses and one-on-ones for EndNote, and they're quite available. So those other ones, I think they're a bit negative about it, but that's only my experience.
Yeah.
Then that's another question. Someone else in the hand up?
No, go ahead.
About my understanding of passing a PhD, for instance, or receiving a PhD, it's not like you can get an H1 on a PhD, you will fulfill the requirements, and it's a sound argument, or you don't. But for honours, I think it's far more, there is actually that. Has that already been, perhaps, could you explain why that's the case, and what's the difference between doing well in honours and doing well in a PhD?
I think,
No, go.
so I think honours and Masters of Arts, they are used to get into higher degrees. So that's why you would need something like that for an entry requirement, like a GPA, for example. Or very often, say, to get into the PhD, you need H1 or H2A or equivalent. So that means that this work is still marked on that scale, but I think this is the kind of transcendentalism of going into the PhD program, because it is the PhD is marked on more than, don't get me wrong, I think the honours thesis is also marked on a more holistic way, rather than just ticking off boxes, perhaps in the undergraduate. Would that be a fair statement to say?
Yeah, and I think it probably, as well as what you've just said, connects with what Maria was saying earlier about the honours year still being part of the undergraduate degree, and so the marking scheme somewhat reflects that. The aim, of course, or hope for most students doing honours being that they would get the H1, but that is equivalent to a HD 80 and above. And then across universities within Australia, they tend to follow a similar system. So it gives a way of, if you've done an honours year at ANU, but you're applying to do a PhD at Melbourne Uni, it's a comparable scale that can be used to assess how well you've done and whether you should be competitive for a PhD. And then I think the pass-fail idea behind the PhD again is historical.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's principally what they're trying to find out at the end of honours. You know, is this person able to go on and do, like, should they be given the chance to go on and do further study? And so sometimes you'll have people that are like really right at the borderline of, say, they might have a grade of 79. Now at your other undergraduate, that would be completely fixed. But there is some sort of a sense, well, look, actually, this person really could do a PhD. So really that's what the H1 is about, like a first class honours. You're not going to get a scholarship. A lot of it is about the funding. So getting a H1 is really crucial to be able to get a scholarship to support with your PhD. And of course you can do a PhD without a scholarship, but it's increasingly hard because you end up having to work so much. So that's the, you know, it's really an entry requirement consistent with undergraduate.
Does that imply that if you pass a PhD, essentially you've done the equivalent of what they're looking for in an H1 honours? Like passing a PhD means at an honours level, you're sort of doing an H1.
In a way, but I think it's also that passing the PhD is like admission to the academy as well. And so it's more a marker of once you've passed that milestone. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, so we've I'm also doing creative honours. So how did you manage the second theorization part of that compared to your creative piece?
Yeah. In my head, I kind of conceptualize the exegesis as the thesis in a sense, and then the thesis was like also the thesis. It was kind of like having two theses going at the same time, basically. So in the exegesis, like I did a literature review, I talked about my methodology. So I kind of approached that like I was writing it over the span of a year, going, this is a thesis, but instead of 20,000 words, it's 10,000 words. And then at the same time doing the thesis itself, but you kind of have to hold off on the discussion aspect of that, the kind of self-analysis until probably like the second half of the year. So that's why for me, I really wanted to get the literature review and the methodology done the first half of the year. So that second half of the year, I could just pretty much focus on the actual discussion and point about the creative stuff that I was doing.
So sorry, was it like more justification or more theorization of the creative component?
I think it would depend on your thesis to some extent and what your argument is. So for me, I was kind of doing something that had been done before, but not really in the way I was kind of approaching it. So I was kind of really taking a lot of theory parts and going like, this is my little contribution to this area, and this is what I'm bringing based on these like quite recent PhD theses, and this is what I can bring to this area. But I think like I know people in my cohort that did more established sort of things, and so they were coming more at it from a more justification of this is my work and this is what I'm
canon sort of.
Yeah, this is where it fits into the pre-existing body.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I have a question. It's about like academic skills, like because during honor, like we need to write thesis, which is way longer than the usual essay we write in undergrad, and so that means we need to read like a larger amount of literature. So how do you like keep track of the literature you have read? Like, you know, on the,
I mean, well, I suppose my response, a lot of it is to do with the way you conceive, but also your discipline conceives of a thesis. So as in my discipline in sociology, I'm really kind of trying to say to students, look, what you're doing is you're posing a question or a problem and you're addressing it in some way. And so that's what you've got to keep in mind when you're writing. When people say things like, oh, have you done your literature review? I find language like that really unhelpful, because what literature am I reviewing? Whereas if you know what is my problem, then that already circumscribes the literature to some extent. You know, if my problem is how we can think about such and such, you know, how we can think about the desire that produces mass consumption and potentially climate change, then I'm going to have a whole body of literature around what desire is, around what consumer capitalism is like. It will just, once you know what your problem is, I think that really helps to circumscribe, to kind of narrow down what is the literature. You don't have to and shouldn't try to raise include every bit of literature in your literature review. It's really what you're engaging with. So, you know, Immanuel Kant might have written about desire, but if it's not at all relevant to what you're doing, then you don't need to mention him. But if Deleuze and Guattari's theorization of desire is relevant, then, and that's what you're engaging with, then you engage with that. So I suppose there's two things I'd say there is like knowing what your problem is and really choosing the people that you're engaging with and the debates that you're contributing to helps to circumscribe.
Yeah, and to add to that, in terms of physically managing the literature that you might be reading, there's a range of techniques. I'm a little bit old school in that I probably do rely on paper more than I should, but I'll print things out and take them to cafe because I like to have background noise. I'll take them to cafes, write hand notes in the margins and in my notebooks, and then initially I might just have the articles like printed out in a pile, but as I start to formulate ideas and kind of arguments or through lines, I can start to separate them out into what might become your chapters, for example. And then I've heard of other people who will read through articles and, you know, have a read again pile and a discard recycle pile. And you could do similar version if you're someone who is good at reading and working on screens. You could do versions of that using your own files that you've set up on your laptop and organize the PDFs or the links to articles that way. And that can be a really nice way of mapping where your thinking is going as well.
And not to be an EndNote spokesperson, but EndNote does that really well. Because you can load the PDF onto EndNote and then you can file it. So you can put notes on the side of your own notes where there might just be, like, you know, the most important page numbers or whatever. And then you can add like tags to it where you're like, this is about gender studies and it falls into this school and it's important for chapter 2. And then you can have like folders on the side that. And you can also have a shared folder. So if you have a friend who's doing similar work, you can both access it and put stuff in.
It's really nice. Yeah.
I mean, maybe the other thing I'd sort of add to that is around that question of mapping. Like sometimes you're working at different scales. Like you're trying to write the so-called literature review, and you know you're getting into this sort of detail of who said what about whatever. Try and keep on whichever technique you use. Sometimes it might be a big piece of paper and a pen, or it might be, you know, an equivalent online. Just keep on mapping those themes, so you keep on sort of coming back out and jumping to that bigger scale. Okay, I seem to have a literature here on desire, a literature on consumption, a literature on blah. Keep that sort of mapping happen and then happening. That also has a function of letting you see the evolution of what you're doing. Okay, now I've kind of got more competent in that theme. I'm a bit of an expert in that theme now, but this is where I need to hone up a bit.
That physical mapping is also really good if you're stuck with writing, on a paragraph by paragraph level, you know, to map out on a piece of paper, what's my topic sentence going to be? What couple of points am I going to make in this paragraph, and linking sentence? And, you know, by the time you've written up those points, you've got your paragraph. So it sounds tedious, but it can actually be a very helpful way of easing yourself into writing at times when you're getting stuck in words and how to say things.
See, I also found it really helpful. I'm a bit old school too. I bought a journal and I made it into a bit of a glossary, because I kept coming into these words over and over again. And at first I was like, oh yes, that's fine. I know what solipsism is. And then I kind of keep reading and like, I really don't know what it is. And so I did buy myself a dictionary, but actually writing it out made it stick. So by the end of it, I had this very nice little glossary that could help inform my writing too. So just
So you can publish it. You've got published everything you write, you know.
I think I've burned it.
Yes, another question.
Yeah, please.
You should have said that.
Yes, so thanks everyone for indulging me. You mentioned before that lines about you can't just set something in that's long desire, but it's not quite relevant to your thesis. Or you still reference the fact that you've read that part of Kant and just justify why it's not relevant.
Yeah, if it's important enough. Like, you know, okay, maybe someone like Immanuel Kant's not the best example, because, you know, say if I were to talk about the idea of the beautiful, it'd be pretty foolish not to reference Kant. He wrote a massive, you know, critique of judgment, which was all about aesthetics. So if they're really kind of canonical, if they're really crucial to the field, then yeah, you probably should reference them. But then sometimes, you know, like you can't kind of reference everyone. So it might be that, you know, perhaps say in my field, someone like Marcuse wrote about desire, but it's kind of clear from the way I'm setting up the whole problem that I'm just, you know, I'm not going down a Freudian psychoanalytical line. I probably don't need to reference the fact that Marcuse wrote about desire. Does that make, yeah. So it's sort of, yeah, there'll be kind of big names, but sometimes you can, if you feel you need to include everything, it can get so crude. I mean, at the end of my PhD, I got it in my head that I had to read Kant's critique of judgment. And one of the examiners said, look, you know, your inclusion of Kant's critique of judgment was unnecessary. Okay. So yeah, you don't feel like you need to include everything. Actually, so it does raise one more thing I'd just bring up, is that sometimes I think a lot of writing and a lot of thesis work is really kind of the emotional challenge. And I think sometimes when you think, oh, I need to cover everything, it's because you're really worried about what someone's going to say. And I will often suggest to my students, and I sometimes give them a separate book or something, which I call the worry book, and to develop habits of trying to separate the emotional concerns you have about your process from the actual process. Yeah. So when you're doing your kind of literature stuff, oh God, what if I don't mention Kant? You know, they're going to just write down in the worry book, worried that, you know, should I mention Kant? Don't actually try and sort that problem out now. And often, like if every couple of days you look at that book, you kind of go, oh, what was I worried about that for? You can cross off a pile of them. And then if some of them persist, oh, actually, why don't I just make sure I do include that point? But just sometimes those anxieties get so tied up with your cognitive processes that they become paralyzing. If you can just separate them out, okay, that's an anxiety I have. I'm just going to document it. And I'm going to move on and then come back to it. I don't know if anyone's got any other.
Really
just to add to that. So in creative disciplines, when you're doing creative work, like a big part of the methodology is doing journaling and writing about your practice. And I didn't do this for my honours, but I want to do it for my PhD, is also journaling about the writing side, the academic writing side, because I think it's applicable there as well. Like it is still a kind of a creative process of writing and thinking about things. And I think, yeah, there's no reason why, like, just because it's a creative kind of methodology, it's still applicable, I think, to that long form writing and going, yeah, this is what I wrote today. This was the session that I wrote this many words, but I'm not happy with it, blah, 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 and then you can go back to it later and go, oh, actually, like, it's fine, or, oh, yeah, actually, I still see, but that's still sticking with me a bit. But, yeah.
Also, with writing, I wouldn't get too hung up on, you know, you'll read some articles which are quite densely and beautifully, in some cases, written. Those two things don't always go hand in hand, but I would always say don't get too hung up on sounding sophisticated. 9 times out of 10 as an examiner, I would prefer clarity over, you know, something that sounds sophisticated. So go for clarity first, and beyond that is something that can develop with practice of writing. And the more you read, the more sophisticated your writing will intuitively become. But, you know, don't feel that because you're in honours this year that you have to somehow write in a different register from what you have used before. A clearly thought out argument, well articulated, is absolutely all that your examiners will be looking for. Yeah.
Okay, and they'll find the complexity in the thinking rather than in the words. Like,
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I felt and still do at times that in my honours year was where I first felt that, oh, the students around me are a lot more sophisticated in the way they're articulating their ideas and their capacity to use big words and so on. But at the end of the day, that wasn't, you know, important. It's more important to develop your thinking around what you want to be writing about and communicate that to a reader. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to use big words.
Alrighty. Do we have time for one?
Of course.
So like in undergrad, we used to put like, in my experience at least, we used to fitting like a whole bunch of ideas in a very concise, like super tight, like 2,000, 3,000 word like thing. Do you have any tips on being like more discursive or like kind of teasing things out a bit more?
It'll depend a lot upon your topic, because it may well be that by the time you've worked out how to make your argument in, how much have we got, 20,000 words maximum, that you actually do need to write
concise.
and be quite concise in the way that you deal with each chapter. And usually at the other end of this year, I find students are trying to distill and refine what they've written into a kind of a jus rather than expand. Yes. yeah, but I think that sort of looser discursive style can be a nice way of starting out. But you'll probably find that each chapter does end up being quite tightly written and more like the kind of essay that you're used to writing. It's just that they're all interlinked with these kind of themes woven throughout them. And that's where I completely agree with what Josh has said about what a creative process writing something like a thesis can be, like just working out how you want to lace those threads through. It's really enjoyable, can be really enjoyable, whilst one of the most painful things that you'll find yourself doing as well at times. Yeah.
You have more words, but you have more to say as well, so it will balance out.
Yeah, my supervisor told me really early on that by the end of it, 20,000 words would feel really small. And I was like, no. And then by the end, I was like, why isn't there more words? And you always have to cut things out that you really want to keep. And you just have to make the objective call. Actually, it's not relevant. And it's quite hard sometimes.
But no.
No.
Sabine may have been or may not have been at one of the students who emailed me as the honours convener to say, does the 10% word thing apply for going over? There are more of those students than than not. Yeah, by the end. Yeah.
But also, like, I think when you get really kind of invested in it, it's not just about sort of some word vomit that you have to do for yourself. You really actually, after, like, the more invested you get in this thing that you're doing, the more you actually want someone else to get it. And so that means that some of the kind of writing task will be, how do I keep a reader engaged? Which means that where you don't, you know, something you don't have to do in a 5,000 word essay or a 3,000 word essay is keep on pulling them along. Whereas I think to keep a reader engaged in a longer piece, you'll find that probably at the end of each chapter, you'll have some kind of a, you know, summing up. At the start of the next chapter, you'll kind of be reminding them what we've done is this and this. You know, you'll be sort of wanting to bring them with you, and that some of that takes words as well. So that sort of builds up some of the discursivity as well, is having your reader in mind, I think.
One honours session similar to this, I heard some good advice around things you can do early in the year or at moments where you're stuck, procrastination work, if you like. It's that will still move you forward. So in the honours and masters guide, there is a section devoted to formatting of the thesis, and you can potentially set up, you know, all of those things in a Word document ready to go for when the time comes. And then, you know, even if you're working in a way, as Maria's described, you might find it more useful whilst you're doing some writing to write single spaced so that you can see more of your argument on each page, and that could help you get your head around it better. But then when the time comes to get it into the thesis document, you've got some of those things set up. And then if you're using EndNote as well, that will probably factor into how you do your writing, because you might want that to all accumulate as you go. But yeah, little jobs like that can be quite good to do when you're not in the mindset for unpacking a theoretical article or something like that.
Write your acknowledgements page and just strike friends off when they fail you.
All right, cool. Are we all out of questions? Perhaps.
Did we have any online ones or chat?
Yeah, no,
One?
that was just him saying, oh, I need to go.
Okay, no problem.
All right, well, that was
Thank
great.
you for listening and for your questions.
Yeah,
Yeah, super fun.
have a great year, everyone.